Good to hear from everyone in the chat. Looks like we have a delightfully mixed audience of folks calling in from the US and some from China as well. Always good to see, considering that's very much the intent of our program here, to bring these audiences together. So yeah, very excited for this conversation this evening. I think it should be a very exciting topic. So for those of you who are attending our youth dialogue for the first time tonight, this is a program from the Living Earth movement, co-sponsored also by the Cobb Institute and the Institute for the Postmodern Development of China. And basically, once a month, we get together on Zoom, Friday for those of us in the US, in North America, and Saturday morning for those of us in China. And each month we invite a new speaker, kind of alternating between a speaker from the US side or from the China side to sort of dig into a particular topic that relates to ecological civilization, ecological living, ecological consciousness, and hopefully from there be able to talk about these things, this kind of across our divided Pacific Ocean, and hopefully build some kind of cross-cultural bridges between the United States and China, especially in light of some of the complex geopolitical tensions that exist and are flamed by some of the powers that be. So yeah, we're doing something different and hopefully moving towards intercultural ecological civilization. And so yeah, this evening very happy to have Matt here to talk about some interesting stuff, rewilding and bioregionalism. And yeah, this is some definitely new information for me, and interested to hear about how this works in the San Francisco area, but then talk about applications or translations of these topics, these ideas to other areas as well. So Matt, welcome. I'll hand it off to you.
Well, thank you, Jared, and thank you everybody for being here. I wanted to first of all thank Jared and the Cobb Institute and the Institute for Postmodern Development and all of these groups that I've only just learned about, some a little longer than others. But I really appreciated also this, on the one hand, desire for more partnership across the Pacific as well as across the world. And also just appreciate the eco-civilization as a bridge between the two, as both an aspirational symbol, as well as maybe a common destination that that there are multiple paths towards. So thought I'd give a shout out to that, to the goal of what brings us all together. So thank you. Okay, so my talk tonight is on rewilding eco-civilization, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about bioregionalism, bioregion being a life place, and so grounding that life place in what I think Gary Snyder, American Buddhist, called watershed consciousness, as well as what Thomas Berry, a scholar of Asian religions, termed the dream of the earth. So that's a little bit of the goal, and I'm going to be discussing that kind of through my perspective, both as somebody who grew up in the San Francisco area, as well as a student in the Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, formerly the California Institute of Asian Studies, and which was started by Haridas Chaudhry, who was bringing Sri Aurobindo's method of integral philosophy, integral yoga, to the West as well. And so uh, as well as leveraging some experiences, during my time in different places, including Planet Drum Foundation, which was uh, just celebrated its 50th anniversary this year, but kind of an early example of bioregional thought and its contribution to ecological civilization and the transforming of urban landscapes into places where life can flourish as well. And so that's kind of some of the ideas that have brought this together. And I'll also say, if anybody has any particular questions that either you feel called to ask right now, or that come up in the chat, please, or come up along the talk I'm giving here, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try to answer along the way. So, with that said, one of the things that I do feel is a place of convergence with some of these groups that we're maybe talking about today is this idea of integrity. Land integrity was a key component of Aldo Leopold's land ethic. And that idea of integrity, I think, is also very much bound up in this idea of integral philosophy and integral ecology, which has also been getting a lot more traction these days with Pope Francis's message on integral ecology, and some of the work that that the field of ecology and religion has really been pushing through with Thomas Berry. So just to kind of give some background on what rewilding is and how it came to be. In 2020, the United Nations sort of realized that they were off track to reach their sustainable development goals, as well as the Millennium Development Goals, that were seeking to address a number of aspects of civilization by 2030, which had been declared the kind of last chance to avoid catastrophic climate change. And so 2020 to 2030 was declared as the decade for ecosystem restoration, which it was assumed would be necessary in order to make these targets. And so the IUCN commissioned a rewilding task force to develop guidelines for the decade of ecosystem restoration, with rewilding as a strategy for ecological restoration. And so initial research, surveys, focus groups, academic articles, and ultimately a number of books really put into motion. And I'm seeing my screen is sort of freezing at times here. Can everybody hear me? Or
Yep,
okay,
you're coming through.
Great. And so the Rewilding Task Force put together a list of guidelines. If anybody has the article available, guiding principles for rewilding. This was really this became the guidelines for the decade of ecosystem restoration, as well as a number of other groups involved in rewilding were using these to fashion their strategies. And I wanted to bring up the origins of rewilding, which the article mentions are found in the pages of the Earth First Journal, which during the 80s and 90s and is still in existence today, really seemed to be a repository for ecological wisdom and radical action that emerged with his rallying cry of no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. And so the Earth First Journal, the Earth First movement, and really the radical ecology movement at large, drawing its analysis from wilderness activism and conservation biology and ecopsychology, as well as environmentalism and green anarchy and bioregionalism and primitivism, indigenous resistance movements and deep ecology, all of these groups that are feeling as if the state, the corporations, this nexus is accelerating extraction for profit, is undermining the life support systems upon which any human community is based, and so is coming together in opposition in order to try to determine a way to resolve this conflict and address this issue. And so some of you might know Edward Abbey, who the author of Desert Solitaire, as well as the book Monkey Wrench Gang, is drawing on an anarchist communist praxis as applied to ecological defense. And so it becomes this example of a kind of anti-technology, Luddite-inspired sabotage of the machinery that is causing the destruction of nature, ecocide. And so Earth First is then developing all of these monkey wrenching manuals and land defense guides and various campaigns that are all developed and bringing together these coalitions, organizing workers and environmentalists on behalf of ecosystem issues. This is in the 80s and 90s, and really working to delay development, win protections, and save species. So the pages of Earth First Journal, though, are not just detailing this more radical wisdom, but also really putting on display the degree of conflict that's within the movement as well. So questions like, when is compromise necessary, and should ecological resistance include an analysis of gender and class? What is the role of violence? Is environmental sabotage justified? And above all, this looming question of how can people who don't think what is currently taking place is going far enough, how can these radicals get to the root of the issue in order to devise a comprehensive strategy to address industrial civilization's ecocidal effect? And so what you have over the course of the 80s, during this Reagan-Thatcher neoliberal economic paradigm, in which the definition of sustainable development is developed in the Brundtland report, is the development of this strategy under the name of rewilding, which again emerges in the pages of the Earth First movement before it ends up splitting and taking multiple directions. Some of you might have heard of Dave Foreman. He starts this magazine called Wild Earth, which develops a more academic, scientific version of rewilding, which is later adopted by scientists and policymakers. And then there's more of a kind of new age individualist rewilding that becomes a more eco-psychological, personal version of rewilding, focused on skill building and tool making. Different organizations and companies develop rewilding as a way to promote the reintroduction of animals and ecotourism. And so you have all of these, you have this very eclectic mix of different evolutionary pathways through which rewilding has taken, that some of which are appropriated in, by states, by extremist groups, and it's sort of interesting also. I think I just read something that the original car bomb was invented by the anarchist, but also used against Judy Berry, who was a green anarchist in Northern California, as a way to try to assassinate what become very powerful, threatening land defenders in a economic context that is very much about protecting profits. So today's land protectors, I'm sure some of you know, are threatened or assassinated, you know, and the question is, you know, who is doing that and why and what can be done. But you have today corporations and states which have the same extractivist goals that have been resisted for decades now. And even what seems to be a more ecologically attuned civilization with the rise of renewable energy systems, et cetera, are the same kind of rare earth mineral extraction, the fossil fuel industries that are powering, you know, modern electrical grids and thermoeconomic activity that continues to maintain this general process, extracting biospheric matter, exploiting labor, concentrating wealth, all of which are themes and reasons for why civilizations and ecosystems and any system really collapses. And so what we have is the replacement of the sun and earth, where plants photosynthesize and grow for herbivores and predators, to the human economy, which is has lots of waste, has lots of suffering, and seems to be undermining the conditions for its own sustained existence. Hence why we're here. So this big question in the environmental movement, is this natural, is this unnatural, is a question, and in many ways it's both, right? It's to some degree natural to hyper-exploit until one collapses, at which point there's a more sustainable path figured out. But it's also unnatural in that it seems to be anti-nature. It's against nature. And so you have this human control that's mastering nature through this kind of ultra domesticated approach to animal economies and all sorts of others that really looks at those standing in the way of this progress as Luddite, right? Anti-technology, uncivilized, and sort of a regression, right? A devolution in some ways. And so I'm bringing this up because these are some of the questions that, following the 1968 global revolutions, in which this revolutionary spirit seemed to have this expression, even though it wasn't enough, there seems to have been a major shift. And so this brings me to this 1968 radical philosophy. I mentioned I go to the California Institute of Integral Studies, which started in San Francisco in 1968. I graduated from UC Santa Cruz, which was started in 1968. And you have, at this time, this political hotbed for radical thought, for critical academics, and in the Bay Area and San Francisco in particular, you have a flow to the West Coast and San Francisco and Bay Area for something else, and At this point, I'm going to bring in Peter Berg. Peter Berg was, I believe he was a Jewish man from New York who came to San Francisco and joined the mime troupe, which was this politically engaged group that did mime and theater, which then he and some friends ended up starting the Diggers, which was eventually, well, within the context of San Francisco radical politics, the Diggers offer a way to engage in a type of guerrilla theater that is aimed at transforming people's minds, right? People are flocking to San Francisco, but with the influx of thousands of people, there's a question as to how to come together, how to treat the land with respect. And so what eventually becomes a kind of radical opposition of mainstream uses these techniques of propaganda of the deed, where the deed is, urban guerrilla theater, in order to change people's minds and also get them thinking about another way of life. Right, on the one hand, protesting and critiquing the industrial society is all well and fine, but if there's not another way to be to complement that, dual power can't be built. And so you have some difficulty living the life that you want. And so these themes, direct action, autonomy, self-determination, self-defense, and mutual aid, that are coming out of this radical theory that is put into practice in San Francisco in the service of a more ecologically inclined way of urban organizing, way of urban living. These ideas become, on the one hand, a defensive action, right, as a way to, and I'm talking now about applied to ecological defense actions. You have, on the one hand, a defensive approach where it's protecting threatened areas, as well as an offensive approach in which campaigns are designed to organize and protect space, as well as, and I think I skipped around a bit, and so I'm coming to it. And so in this moment of 1968 and the aftermath of it, where people are seeking to break with the cultural consciousness, develop alternatives to the reigning paradigm, going into these back to the land communes and these other social experiments with radical ecological principles in mind, you have Peter Berg and Judy Goldhalf, who are touring these many different experiments of ecological living, recognizing that growing up in an anti-ecological society means you learn anti-ecological practices, and this need for learning creates a network where each commune, each experiment is then able to communicate through Peter and Judy in order to give advice, give wisdom to the next community. This wisdom is collected, and the Planet Drum Foundation is born. Publishing ecological wisdom texts, organizing continent congresses and watershed collaborations, mapping projects, eco-city projects, bioregional education programs, in which the contours of the land, the sun, the water, the animals, the different species, the plants, all the activities can be identified in order to think about the land with these assets in mind. And so this becomes ultimately what allows them to, when Ecuador experiences El Nino storms and through the deforestation of land, a city or a town ends up being hit by mudslides, you have built into the charter of that city an ecological aspiration that that Planet Drum ends up working with them to develop a more ecological minded city. So I bring this bioregional aspect up because in 1980, Peter Berg, Judy Goldhalf, Gary Snyder, Marie Bookchin are all coming together in San Francisco for a meeting on these topics, and in doing so are able to spread a bioregional culture, so that when a restoration conference in UC Berkeley occurs five years later, this is around 1985, in which somebody states on a panel that nature has everything she needs to rewild, she just needs humans to let her. You have this reported back to Earth First, and so this is the first time rewilding comes into print. It is then attached to the 3C rewilding of Dave Foreman, this idea that if you have protected ecological cores, you connect them with corridors and you reintroduce carnivores. These 3Cs are all that you will need to jumpstart a thriving ecosystem again, the basis of which an economy can be sustained. So that's a little bit about bioregionalism and where rewilding comes in. I would have liked to share a little bit more on rewilding itself, but maybe I can talk a bit more about that in conversation if it comes up. But I wanted to, I mentioned cosmology in the description, and I wanted to just bring that into the conversation, because the reason I think rewilding works is because it follows the principles of the cosmos itself, and so for those who are not cosmologists, I would maybe recommend a few authors and books. The first would be Brian Swimm's Cosmogenesis, which I think is a really good way of understanding how one is the universe. And especially from a process philosophy, I think that works really well. Who we are and what we are is, at this point in space and time, is the entire universe's energy as it has moved through us and into us and out of us, in relation to all of us and the landscapes that sustain us, right? And so being conscious and integral participants in the wider landscape allows us to, for better or worse, work with or against the land in ways that allow for this energy to flow where is most natural, where it is inclined, or harness that energy and direct it towards what any of us or companies or communities determine to be the necessary place it should flow. So, for instance, a dam would be a good example of humans harnessing the energy flow of a river for human purposes, right? For instance, electricity, right? On the other hand, what dams can also do is prevent the free movement of fish, which in turn affects the rest of the ecosystem. And so that would be a pretty easy example of this idea of energy flow. What cosmologists have found out is that energy has specific tendencies that it tends towards. So, for instance, the reason why a tree has branches is because a branching pattern that is self-similar across scale turns out to be the complex structure that energy is most likely to flow, to structure itself so that it can flow most efficiently. And so this branching pattern that is self-similar across scale occurs in our blood vessels, it occurs in trees, it occurs in our lungs, our brains, it occurs in rivers, the watershed, even the way that galaxies and superclusters are patterned. Again, because that is the most efficient pattern through which energy can flow. And so if we can align ourselves with that same kind of pattern, the argument is that is the way to sustain a system for longer, rather than exploit the energy as quickly as possible, at which point the system collapses because it is deprived of the energy that had been hyper exploited. So that's a little bit of the cosmological dynamics. Eric Chasen talks about free energy rate density, where you have this rate actually increasing over time with the birth of stars, the formation of life, and then the human brain and networks of brains coming together as a way to make this energy flow more efficient, which allows for human communities to thrive and become more complex. There's also a critique about whether civilization is more complex than more traditional communities. And the argument is that traditional communities, hunter-gatherer bands or semi-nomadic, actually have a higher energy rate density due to the fact that they use less energy, but because the energy food is distributed more equitably and faster, these communities are able to have a higher energy rate on energy return, as opposed to industrial civilization, which the amount of concrete, as well as all of these, the time it takes for fossil fuels to get to where they are going, sort of makes this equation less efficient. And so anyway, I'll hold off more on that. Adrian Bejan has a book about the constructal law that also talks about this. and that's sort of applied to languages, or sorry, just any systems, but including languages. Again, where energy tries to flows in more efficient ways, is essentially how I would put that. But what's interesting in this then, and the relationship of land to language and consciousness, is that Carl Jung, the psychologist, psychotherapist, believed that archetypes and cognitive structures were similarly able to do this and help the individual organize, self-organize to more efficient ways of being, and he called this individuation. And so these symbols and these structures that appeared in dreams, that appeared in myths, fairy tales, thought stories, and theories, were also natural structures that helped nature self-organize in ways that were more efficient. And these were stratigraphically inscribed into the land, so that the land would become these complex archetypal psychological expressions of human motion, of human logic, and of human instinct in many ways. And so what we see when we look at a landscape that has been transformed by industrial development is a land that is expressing this particular colonial archetype that is extracting the wealth and value of a landscape, the energy in that landscape, and transporting it to the cities, to human concentrations in ways that create a lot of pollution. And so the sort of final thing that I wanted to get to then, and I apologize if I've been jumping around a little bit. I have slides in my head, but they're not coming through. What I wanted to bring up in this sort of last part is just, if this is true, that the landscape reflects our inner desire, but those inner desires are structured by the ecological context that we inhabit and that affects us and that comes through us, even though we don't necessarily know it, then we can engage in an ecology of dreams in which we recognize that when we go to sleep and we think about life and we dream about the things that matter, each component in that dream is a combination of memory, of associations, of emotions, of personal and social and cultural residue that is concentrated and offers a generative experience in which we're able to play and learn and test new conditions or pathways. And we can use these dreams and these dream reports and the dream work that goes with these reports and develop dream theories and engage in dream research in a way that understands dreams as the constitutive complex experiences of the wider world of nature. And not only that, but the experience has been that so many people have had insights, flashes of revelation. Complex problems are solved because in these non-ordinary states of consciousness, um, we're not only able to model these very complex circumstances that combine um, psychic experience, social experience, ecological experience, cosmological experience, mythological experience, etc. Um, but the instinctual inclination that we find in dreams is also able to complement or what's the word, compensate for these problems with solutions that pop up in our dreams and that we can bring into the waking world and make decisions based on um, in order to potentially align with that same cosmological process in which energy moves and self-organizes towards more complex, um, more equitable flows of energy that that ultimately become the basis for ecological cores, ecological corridors, um, and and the infrastructure necessary for large scale uh, ecosystems to be restored um, through these animals that we have largely lost today. So um, anyway, I'm gonna stop it there, and I appreciate you bearing with me um, for that. But just to sort of bring this together, um, rewilding, I think, um, is in many ways, like eco-civilization, a symbol that unites opposites, right? Ecology and civilization, right? For so long, these have been completely at odds with each other, but eco-civilization offers a reconciling symbol to unite these opposites, right? And rewilding, in many ways, does too, right? Um, there was a wild world, it is no longer wild, and so a return to the wild is conceived of as this union of opposites. The problem is, I think, that as popularizers of science like Jared Diamond write, um, in the sense that agriculture was humanity's worst mistake. Um, Civilization depends on agriculture, right, and depends on this worst mistake of humanity, in the sense that it has an enormous energy source that is then turned into the infrastructures of society that tend towards exploitation, extraction, and a sort of hyper acceleration of um, this domesticating tendency, which, when scaled up, um, destroys wilderness areas, destroys wild animals, and destroys the possibility for experiencing a wild world. And so, while I appreciate the symbol of eco civilization as a reconciling symbol, as a destination um, for people to shoot for, I also want to acknowledge the shadow aspect of of civilization, whether it's ecological civilization or not, because there's something special, not just about, you know, a civilization that can be sustained, but what lies beyond civilization as well, um, which is ultimately what civilization depends on, which is a wild world able to exist for itself. Um, and so rewilding offers, I think, a way to um, move eco-civilization towards a less domesticated, more wild world um, that I think is desperately needed. So, anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to invite anybody to put any questions either from me or for the group in the chat, and feel free also to, I don't know how we do this, Jared, but if anybody wants to raise their hand as well, and I'll just kind of check out the chat and see what people are saying. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. You've given us quite the breadth and wealth of information and perspectives to chew on here. So I'm sure we will have yeah, plenty to discuss in our remaining time. So typically, I now invite any of our leaders, our elders in Living Earth community, Cobb Institute, Institute for Postmodern Development of China, to raise any questions or give any comments for Matt. Anyone want to take the stage here?
And just a huge thanks to those people putting links in the chat.
Yeah,
You
happy to do it.
you've got a wealth of information to draw on from here. So I'm looking forward to how you all honestly put this into practice, because you know, if there is a solution, I think it is in the direction of rewilding. I think it's in the direction of bioregionalism, um, and I think it's in the direction that your dreams will tell you, and that's not hokey, but it's where the source of nature is, and so realizing that that's in you and available at any time and not just out there, I think is an incredibly important and empowering message, especially knowing that the entirety of the universe and its powers is bubbling up in your dreams and in every action that you take. So, thank you.
Well, I'll jump in with an initial question here. So one of the things I think about a lot with yeah, rewilding, sort of watershed consciousness, these sorts of things, is they're very place-based, very focused on one's actual sort of ecological context. And with that, I mean, you have very sort of individual moods and approaches and understandings that are linked very much with the actual environment of your surroundings. So in our context here, where we're trying to do ecological work, ecological consciousness from the US and China, oh, these are places with pretty different bioregions, watersheds, etc., though there are similar climates and such. How can we go about both sort of localizing and focusing on our individual context, but also be able to sort of effectively translate and communicate and collaborate across those ecological boundaries?
Yeah. Yeah, what a great question. And I think this is really, and I know somebody put Planet Drum Foundation's website in the chat. I do highly recommend looking at that group because this was the question that they've struggled with for 50 years. And, on the one hand, and you can Google bioregional quiz, I think. Um, and what it takes is being curious about what it takes to live. Where does your water come from? What are the plants that are local that you can use for food or you can use for medicine? What are the species? What is the history of the land use in your area for the last 50, 100, 200, 500,000, 50,000 years? Um, so that you can start to create these maps in your head that um, that you can draw on in order to satisfy your needs, right? Where your food comes from, where your water comes from, what your entertainment comes from, where your gadgets come from, right? We're all on a computer, I would imagine. And so, every part of your computer comes from a place. And so we've become completely divorced from the source of our experience, um, because the supply lines are so complex and extend beyond our consciousness that it's impractical to know these things. And so developing again a repository of ecological knowledge takes curiosity, takes a group of committed people, I think, um, to inspire one another and to work with one another. And it also takes organizing at larger and larger scales, right? So there can be bioregional groups, there can be ecological cities, there can be watershed councils, there can be bioregional congresses, there can be continent congresses. Um, and in fact, at the bioregional gathering of North America, national North America Bioregional Gathering, something like that. Um, these were opportunities for people to come together over themes that really transcended um, each bioregion, um, and yet people could give strategies and tips and what worked, best strategies to other groups um, while really sinking into the place-based particulars that it took to garner that knowledge. Um, and so there's a depth that is required, there's a breadth that's required, and there's an integration of all scales, all levels, that also needs to happen, um, because not every bioregion looks the same, and not every culture looks the same, and and what that means is that a trade takes place, and and what is traded can be good for both parties, bad for both parties, um, and and similar to the bioregions that they're coming from and going towards. Um, and I see Christo has a good example of a picture of a bioregion, sometimes called Cascadia, I think that would be, um, where these bioregions and these ecological zones um, cross different states, cross different countries. And so these can really be an opportunity for collaborative peace building between nations that share common borders, um, where the crossing of a jaguar, for instance, in the California, Mexico, southwestern region, right? these areas, these animals, these beings have the potential to be peacemakers between nations who realize that uh, their collaboration is both made possible and makes possible the integrity of the land. Yeah, so
Beautiful.
I hope that answers something.
Yeah, yeah. Gives us a lot to chew on again, for sure. Yeah, I saw Christo had another question in the chat just a bit
Sure.
ago. In light of the goals of rewilding, do you anticipate a return to pre-civilization indigenous cultures like existed on North America pre-contact?
Yeah, it's a fun question. And first off, I should say I'm not a doctor, but maybe one day. Um, One thing that has been beautiful about living in San Francisco is there are so many storytellers, right? Ursula Le Guin wrote The Dispossessed. Starhawk wrote The Fifth Sacred Thing. Ernest Kallenbach wrote, I believe he wrote the book Ecotopia. Um, and so, and just like uh, Edward Abbey wrote Monkey Wrench Gang, right? These are opportunities to dream a vision of a new world based on the principles and values and goals and um, meanings that we um, that come up for us in conversation over drinks, that comes up for us in our dreams, that comes up when we're building castles in the sky, right? That comes up in radical alternatives to the dominant paradigm that we're all trying to escape. And so coming from a place like San Francisco, which is, I think, one of the most dense urban places in the United States, and going to Santa Cruz for my undergrad degree, which was, by the way, I think rated worst school in America by Fox News, which I appreciated. And hearing a teacher describe his version of the future as, people taking years to cross the United States because they would be in caravans that might use animals as opposed to fossil fuel infrastructure, right? That type of anti-technological premise for the future was almost disorienting for me because I naturally took the acceleration and the progress of technology for granted. Um, that said, um, I think science fiction, fantasy, ecotopian literature, whether it's in the 1600s or the 21st, recognize that the difference between utopia and dystopia is very, very small. And one person's utopia can be completely dystopian to somebody else. And so that becomes a factor when we're operating at the end of the Holocene, at the sort of Anthropocene that could potentially move into an entirely new era. Thomas Berry and Brian Swim suggest we live in between the Ecozoic era and the Technozoic era. And so kind of, what that looks like is anyone's guess. And so to the question of Christos, do you anticipate a return to pre-civilization indigenous cultures like existed on North America pre-contact? You know, to some degree, that depends on the scale of time that we're talking about. Um, in 100 years, I'm not sure. In a few thousand years, or 10,000, 50,000, however many years, it's another question. Um, I think that that will depend on what happens now, really. I think somebody said, like, there's a great quote. I don't know the technologies that World War III will be fought with, but I can tell you that the weapons of World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And that was, I think, a very cynical sort of anticipation that we might blow ourselves up. And so a place like Chernobyl, that, experienced a meltdown, a nuclear meltdown, um, you have a place without humans anymore, but also a place where wildlife is returning in a way that had not been seen for many, many years. And so, again, to in terms of my anticipating a return to pre-civilization, indigenous cultures like existed on North American pre-contact, um, there are Louis Herman writes a book called Future Primal, and John Zerzan writes a book called Future Primitive. And so this is not to say that it's going to be a return, but it's going to be the future. But it's really about what the present looks like. And so what I hope is a re-indigenizing, that people learn how to re-inhabit their bioregions in accordance with traditional ecological wisdom that will lead to something that we call post-civilization, although eco-civilization might be a post-civilization. And I doubt it would be pre-contact because simply due to the nature of entropy and thermodynamics. But what will come after, I think, will be something that survives the suicidal nature of civilization while also potentially incorporating and integrating the best of what came before. What the best um, is a personal judgment, and it will be a cultural decision, I think, and in many ways, just natural selection will tell. So I don't know, but I look forward to reincarnating and finding out later on. So that'll be my my way of answering that. Thank you. Um, I see Vivian has a question, and so does Jay. Um, let's see, I'll read Vivian's first just because it's a little shorter, which will hopefully allow me to prepare for the other one. So China does talk about different ecoregions mainly because of their sheer size, and new national park system sounds like initiatives of moving that direction. Yeah, I think first of all, I know very little about China and its endeavors. But what I would say is that national parks seem to be a good example of ecological cores. And what would need to happen, according to Rewilding, is that new cores would need to exist. Those cores would all need to be connected, and keystone species would need to be reintroduced in those cores in ways that can expand all of those. And that will not happen if industrial civilization develops and expands to sever those corridors, decrease those cores, and extirpate those carnivores. And so this is why having a positive vision as bioregionalists, as rewilders, as reinhabitation advocates discuss, because it requires living in a way where the pressure humans put on the land can be offset with a relationship that is able to reciprocate as opposed to extract. And Planet Drum has done a great job, and there are others to really think about what that looks like. And Peter Berg has a book called Envisioning Sustainability that I think is worth checking out. And I'm just going to read Jay's question, if you don't mind, because I see the word dream in here, so I'm excited. I'm curious about the relevance of bioregional consciousness in the lives of friends in China among young, old, urban dwellers, rural dwellers. What are the units in terms of which people think in China? Cities, provinces, etc. I'm also curious about the history of dream culture in China. I am too. In the West, Jung plays such a powerful role. Is there an analog to the Jungian tradition in China? Finally, I'm curious about the role of universe thinking in China, not just planetary web of life thinking, but universe thinking. What is the analog to China to universe thinking with stellar systems as guides? I think that's such a beautiful question, and I would turn that to the audience if they have any questions, if they have any answers to that, or feel free to put it in the chat. I did come across a student in ESR who was from China, and I asked, I was curious because I asked something to the effect of, how, there's Confucius, there's Lao Tzu, there's the Buddha, do people, there's sort of indigenous spiritualities and land-based approaches, and so how do all of these come together? And he sort of talked about Taoism and Confucius's contribution and the Buddha's as a way of connecting the mind with the society, with the cosmology, and finding ways in which all of those can work together, which I thought was really beautiful. And we talked about the difference between West and East, and China's governance system, and the United States, and the idea of collective and individual, and all of these different things. And I bring that up because I think these symbols that come to us in our dreams, and we find out in political rhetoric and literature, are ways of bringing together and harmonizing these different orders in us. It's like in our psyche and mind, in our society, in our ecology, in our cosmology, as ways of bridging that, and also thinking of something like the mandate of heaven and the sort of authority bestowed upon any regime or governing system or state as very much ecological, in that if you don't have a way to order your psyche and harmonize with society and ecology and cosmology, there is a breakdown in the integrity of the land, this source of divinity, this life-giving source, that can be interpreted symbolically in certain ways. So bioregional consciousness, watershed consciousness, the role of dreams in finding pathways through conflict-ridden transitioning periods in human histories. I think religions are, in many ways, an impulse. Many religions draw on dreams, and as well as activists who follow their dreams, and this idea of what our desire pulls us to, what our insides are attracted to on the outside, can be seen very much the same way as a cosmic process that we may not know what it's leading to, but we can have faith that what it's leading to is where the universe is going. Anyway, so if anybody has any thoughts on that, please raise your hand.
Jay, do you want to jump in with anything more on that line of thought?
I would just love to hear from some friends in China about either of those three topics: bioregional consciousness, dream culture, or thinking in terms of the universe, which I think is a bit different from thinking in terms of the Earth. In terms of thinking in terms of the universe, I think there are rich astrological traditions in China. That China has plenty of astrological consciousness historically. And that would be a place where you really turn to the stars. It's non-terrestrial in a way. The stars become the guide. In terms of dreams, I'm really just curious. And I bet Vivian has a lot to say there, or many of you. Tell us about dream culture in a Chinese context. I'm waiting.
Me too.
I wanted to cue first Meijin. She made a beautiful comment out there. If you're there, Meijin, would you like to tell us a bit more from the cosmology of China? How, if you're there, yes.
Hello. Yeah, Jay and Vivian. First, yeah, I would like to say thanks to Dr. Matt. Actually, this is a fantastic opportunity for me to learn those kind of like rewilding, the ideal and the theory, and all of those complicated with so many fields. So it's really valuable for me to rethink deeply about the ecological civilization. Yeah, so I really appreciate you bring those into this group to join our group. So thank you so much. And back to those questions, and about the dream culture. So that is a very challenging for me to talk about. Yeah. Do you remember, join our Sunday list? So those kings, when they want to do something, yeah, so when they try to make a decision, like should we go to the war or should we take this action? So sometimes they have had a dream. And some like wushi, how do you say, Vivian, wushi in English?
Shaman.
Yeah, shaman. Yeah, will give the, how do you say, interpretation, to explanation, to say what the dream of king has represent. Is good luck or bad luck. So you can say in the early period of Chinese, and the decision making involve of those dreams. And also, yeah, when Dr. Matt talking about rewilding them, yeah, so that immediately make me feel, yeah, those kind of things, you know, depend on the attitude, how do we say, treat the nature. Yeah. And so that is a relationship between human being and nature. And if in the very beginning, those relationship, it's a good one. Why we need to do rewilding, you know, and for Chinese, so it's hard for us to how do you say, to understand the wildness, you know, because we always think we are the part of the nature. Yeah, we're just like a brother and a sister, yeah, under the heaven. So, and we have really, how do you say, the fun relationship. So that is how I see in the chat. I say, yeah, maybe Chinese people, they don't think, oh, there's a wildness that against us. They always, how do you say, live in the good relationship with nature. So nature is not our enemy. It's not the thing we should conquer. Yeah. So that's bring me the idea. If so, here the rewilding, the wilderness, the philosophy of wilderness, maybe it's a really important issue, but maybe it's not a primary issue in the context of Chinese culture. Yeah, like there is a lot of idea here. If you use the idea here to interpret the Chinese one, like native people. Yeah, in China, we don't have a native people. Yeah, and how do you say, the another those things, yeah, that's I stop here. Yeah, so that is how. So when we think about ecological civilization, yeah, so we don't use those terms. Yeah, we don't use those terms because we don't think there is like, how do we say, we don't think, yeah, we need to do much on rewilding. Yeah, maybe Brandy and Vivian has more to say.
Yes. There's many layers to respond. So rich. I feel the space is full of rich, bubbling ideas, but also ideas needs to be not translated simply the language wise, but also culture coded. That I think for our friends in China, to get more feel relevance to it. Because me myself kind of work in this field in China, and then I live in the US, and I kind of live in between these narratives. I also find it very difficult when I am back in China and trying to talk about this topic of bioregionalism and rewilding with my friends and with my community there. There I have already encountered such issues. So I will come back to that later. I want to first address Jay's beautiful questions. There are several questions. I probably have to email back and forth a bit on that. And there was one thing that you asked about the unit, and the unit that we think in terms, or is it family, or is it community, or provinces? And the simple answer is it's not fixed. And there was a book I highly recommend our friends here from the US to read. It's from the sociologist Fei Xiaotong in, I think, in early 1950s or late 1940s. He wrote a book called From the Soil. In that book, 乡土中国, basically for our friends here in China, from the book, in this book, he concluded that the real and everything in the circles or the thinking units in China kind of organized around relationships, relational circles. He come up with this thing called the orderly diversity pattern, or 差序格局. I don't know, probably there's a better way of translating that in English, that every family in a household put themselves in the middle of their own circle, and they start drawing their circles based on how close they feel with them. So if you are in the middle, and the most close circle will be your relatives, families, it doesn't matter how far they live. It could also be like people living on the other side of the world, and they are part of your close chamber circle. And then next to that, maybe your work colleague. It really it's very relational. It's very subjective how we feel, how we are connected to this. And then if nature in many ways, or animals, or nature, in our traditional sense of nature, part of this closeness, they will bring into our very close nature that we will protect, which kind of bring a very interesting, maybe a modern topic that today with China, we're talking about, protecting nature within the country, and then, some of the important resources we try to look for from elsewhere. So that's not in your close proximity circle of relatedness. Then others, there's your relationship will become more and more diluted, and your actions of holding that relationship will also be less and less, like with the circle opening up like a ripple. So it's very relational. So ask any Chinese to draw their relational circle, that might be quite different. And also the what was the other question that was also interesting? Anyway, I'll leave that for now. Or I'll do rewilding, as we were talking about. Well, sorry. Back to one of the friends here asked about the whether China has already had this bioregional thinking. That wasn't a question I answered, and that the national park is one way to look at it. And with my colleague, some of them here in the chat, we're working with a giant panda national park in China, which span over 3 different provinces, large scale national park, with its the main target flagship species giant panda, and other species in the umbrella protection, and that is one way that we are looking at. But the main problem, I think, for the bioregional thinking here in China is not to compare with the US, like how do we actually live in the life place where everything kind of self-sufficient within our bioregion. But in China, it's more about how do we protect these bioregions, how do we protect this environment, pristine environment, at the same time keep our economic development, but not in the same way as 2-digit growth, but also in a more green way. Or you can criticize that it's still destroying, it's still economic development, but practically speaking, you will see large number of mines closed down, dams, all the dams are shutting down. An economic transition is happening within these bioregions in China, and they act as a economic. They act like a pilot zone, experiment zone, to experiment policies, experiment different business and economic model for that. And how China developed its economy basically with the same model, developing its first testing out in Shenzhen special economic zone, and then expanded to elsewhere. This is kind of the model how Chinese thinks. When we want to create something new, we always start with a testing out mode. So I wonder, well, this is not it's just me thinking, these national parks and these eco regions that we're setting out in China, does seem like in experimental areas to see what are the policies, what are the models, and what are the governance could we reinvent in working and living in this zone, instead of moving all the indigenous away, or the local people away out of it. We actually, yeah, there's not much of a population moving. It's very much still living in place, and respecting and their ecological wisdom in quite a large sense. I would say that could possibly it's a different model that China is developing. I have hope for it. I will stop here for now.
Well, thank you, Vivian. And I just wanted to say what's been really interesting with rewilding after developing in the sort of Earth First Radical Ecology magazine, and then sort of going out into more mainstream with academics and scientists and policymakers. What turned out to be the case is that there were all of these other sort of experiments also. I think in Russia or Siberia, there was a Pleistocene park. And in the Netherlands, there's a very famous example of a place where this is being done as well. In Napa State in England, I think there's another example. Same with islands, and I think in North America there's a Yukon to Yellowstone. So there are all of these different examples. They're all functioning under the umbrella of rewilding. They're all incredibly necessary to contribute to this sort of UN goal of large-scale ecosystem restoration. And they're all have deep critiques of the other rewilding experiments as well, which, for better or worse. And so in all of these examples and all of these experiments and all of these fantasy literature novels as well, there's always this opportunity to be on the side of the wild, or be on the side of domestication, I think, or increased domestication versus increased wildness, and the role of human control in that equation, I think, is very interesting. And so that tension is the source, I think, of nature's kind of spontaneity, so to speak, and that kind of quantum indeterminacy at a personal instinctual level. But yeah, it's more experiments need to be made, I think, and that was really, I think, in the pages of Earth First journal, what was being talked about. People were contesting this term of what does it mean, and how to do it, and how to live it. And there were a lot of mistakes, and there was a lot of people who were hurt, and there were people who were killed, and there's more wildlife protected because of it. And so you have this deep tension that is the source of tonight's conversation as well, and hopefully many more. Yeah, Brynley.
So I kind of want to just add on a little bit to Jay's question. So because I think we're kind of running out of time, so I'm just gonna keep everything kind of short. So I think, especially for dream culture, I think like an interesting thing in China is that we tend to, like, interpret it in the way that like if it's symbolized good or bad, rather than if it's symbolized like a very detailed or like a detailed thing. Like if we dream of for example, if like when we think of dream interpretation, we think of like elements. Like if I dream of a rat or if I dream of a man, what does that mean? But usually it means like whether it's going to be like good things are going to happen or bad things are going to happen. So I think that's kind of like more of like a like these kind of like decoding these symbols, but not in a like a detailed way, but rather in a like more of a luck or what's going to happen way. So that also like kind of point to so in China we kind of have these kind of China calendars where there's like specific times and dates there's gonna be like if it's good luck or bad luck, so or if it fits like if you should like hold your wedding ceremony like at this time or not. So I think that's also a kind of like interesting thing, because I think in Chinese culture it's more about if it's good or bad rather than like if like something more spiritual points to a very detailed action. So I think it's more of that way. And also especially in like teenagers, I think we tend to, especially because like now I'm currently like applying to college and our friends are also applying to college. So we tend to really kind of believe in these like China calendar and dreams and stuff. So like when I submit my application, I would choose the time slot that is like good, symbolize good luck. And our friends would also do that. So I think, but we kind of um I don't know. So like I think it's kind of like kind of a weird relationship in like China, because I'd say like most of my peers would think like if we get these like bad symbolizations in like our dreams, we would think, oh, maybe this is like not accurate or stuff. But if we get like good interpretations, we would think, oh, luck is gonna come to me and like this. So I think it's kind of like we do really kind of believe in these stuff, but it's more of like a so I think that's kind of like also because Chinese people are not that deeply spiritual. So I think it's kind of like a weird dynamic. And yeah, and I also want to add a little bit on the unit, like how do Chinese people consider their units. So I think a very important thing is about like coming from the same province, I guess. Like especially I've heard like in college, in Chinese colleges, like when there's like even before the beginning of college, they would like create WeChat groups of like people coming from the same province, and they would really help each other. Or like for example, my teacher, like my physics teacher, her husband and her they met because they have these kind of social events between these people coming from the same province and studying at the same university. So I think that's also kind of like how people tag themselves by like coming from the same province. But that's also kind of in a macro way when it comes to interactions within the larger China. But like for now, for example, if I'm like currently studying in high school, then it's not really about provinces, because like most of us all come from like the same province. So we kind of think about more of like our like family background or like cultural or like kind of like more values stuff. So I think that's kind of like small things that I want to add.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, and if I can just say this really quickly, one of the cool things that was found in dream research was that so many times what our dreams are doing is they're sort of bringing together these weak associations. And it's at the point where you have things that don't usually connect, where all of a sudden now they do connect, and now you have a kind of epiphany, or you have an insight, or you have a revelation, or it's sort of, has a feeling associated with it. And so there's a kind of a density of meaning, right? That's sort of compacted in this dream. And so there's a natural inclination, I think, to follow that. Sometimes you might have called it synchronicity, when the sort of outside and inside sort of fuse in a non-rational way. But it's not meaningless and it's not irrational. It's the experience of an acausal order that is the sort of fabric of time and energy, in a way that, because of our limited sort of body, perhaps we can't know the past and the future. But it is potentially possible, according to dream research, that in these dreams, you're able to kind of get beyond this separation and either sort of foresee things or tap into other things that might have been hidden or secret or on another kind of layer of meaning. And so anyway, I thought I'd bring that up because choosing things based on these feelings are oftentimes sort of not understood, but can generate very fortuitous experiences. And the theme of good luck in dreams is, I think, not random, but at a sort of intuitive level, we realize that following, the sort of helpful, friendly, magical animals can lead us to prosperous circumstances. And that's a theme in fairy tales, that's a theme in folklore, it's a theme in our dreams, it's a theme in rewilding, follow these helpful animals. And the reason is, I think, because in doing so, we're moving towards a world in which the biodiversity and the seeing meaning in each animal and the contributions that they can make is a place to move towards. So I'll leave it at that. June, see a hand raised from June.
季
Zhang,
平，
Jun Zhang.
季平还在吗？
June, you might be muted.
I'm sorry, I had mistake. I don't know how let this and
Sure.
sorry.
No worries. Thank you for listening in. All right. Any final thoughts from anyone else before we close out for the evening?
Or if anybody has a dream that is, breaking through that they'd like to share, they're welcome to share that too. But no, somebody had something that they were going to say.
I think this part should be added to the generation restoration principles, rewilding. Rewilding not only as a practice, but also like rewilding, like somewhere inside us, rewilding our perception of ourselves, the three divides, to reconnect them. I wonder, why are the UN work so fear of touching this part, this part of knowledge or knowledge. I mean, they have a specific topics about valuing indigenous wisdom as an important, and indigenous community as like crucial partner for biodiversity, partner for ecosystem restorations, and valuing their knowledge and wisdom and ritual, but would never kind of bring that implication back into our modernized, well-educated, mostly modern this society. Like, how do we see ourselves? when we do the rewilding work. I think that's kind of that's missing. But yeah, I would like to thank you, Matt, for this generating conversation. Yeah, very, very interesting. I think you opened up a lot of channels for us to dig more. Also for our friends, Chinese friends here in this topic, this is not irrelevant at all. This is actually very, very relevant for our Chinese context in terms of,中国的乡村振兴, rural revitalization, or 中国的这个绿色发展，中国提出来的生态文明。All this topic that we're here talking about today has so much relevance to all these Chinese terms that we're talking about in China, but we're lacking language. We don't have the right Chinese language to describe this, but not only just to translating it, but also to connect with the China's realities and our own practice. It's an invitation really for all of us here, and no matter which domain, which area that you're working in, you're an educator, you're an architect, and you're you're a businessman, entrepreneur. Think about how does this culture of bioregionalism, life place, can be integrated into our work in China. And yeah, I really looking forward to discuss with our Chinese friends, maybe afterwards in the Chinese chat, what do you think? And if you have any questions and you want to connect even more, we would love to be the bridge for this connection. So yeah, thank you again. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. And I just to respond really quickly, I do think that rewilding in many ways resists exploitation and resists the sort of commodification that is so prevalent in our society. But I also think that dreaming is a form of rewilding that brings us back in touch with the part of us that is most wild and most sort of released from all of the constraints of and obligations imposed on to us by a highly domesticated modern world, as you said. And even so, even despite all of that, even the fact that we lack language to describe this world that is, below the surface, in dreaming and in remembering our dreams and in working with our dreams and in establishing a relationship with this wild part of us, I've found that the language is actually able to come up into our dreams in the phrases that our dream characters say, in the way we sort of shorten our dream to a concise sentence or a title of the dream that can sort of express the wisdom. And so I'm incredibly excited about the potential to bring dream wisdom, wild wisdom into the world through our dreams and act in more wild and more wise ways on behalf of our dreams. So thank you all for dreaming along here. And I hope you will have many good dreams to boot. So thank you.
Wonderful. Great end to note on. Thanks again, Matt. And thank you everyone for participating, for your questions and thoughtfulness. If you're new to our program, I encourage you to check out our page on the Living Earth Movement website. You can find a sign-up form towards the bottom of that page where you'll be notified about each of our monthly dialogues. Usually about a week before is when we get the info out. So next month we will be hosting a Chinese friend to talk about something. So stay tuned and looking forward to it. And Vivian can put our WeChat info in the Zoom as well for anyone who uses that platform to communicate. We've got a small group there that you're certainly welcome to continue the conversation. So